So TNA Wrestling was founded in 2002, they've existed for over 20 years now, and in that time, it's been a very turbulent 20 years for TNA Wrestling. And for a period of time, they even renamed the entire company to Impact Wrestling before renaming it back to TNA in 2024, and during that time period, they almost seemed embarrassed and afraid to mention anything about TNA Wrestling and the past, not wanting to associate with their old selves and the many past controversies, backstage drama, and everything in between for TNA Wrestling. But I think that personally, those old TNA stories are something that we should absolutely embrace. There are some incredible TNA stories and some crazy TNA incidents and drama and major controversies that took place in the original TNA's history. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. These are some of the craziest incidents in the history of TNA Wrestling that I'm going to be talking to you about today. So like the video and let's begin. So first of all, I think we should start off by explaining what TNA Gut Check is. So let me explain that. TNA Gut Check was pretty much their version of WWE Tough Enough. However, it was very different, and let me explain why. Pretty much, Gut Check had two versions, and both of them had different formats. The first Gut Check took place between April 2012 to November 2012, and this format saw an unsigned wrestler have a match with a currently signed TNA wrestler. The result of the match really didn't matter though, as after the match, 3 judges would decide whether or not that wrestler would get signed. So TNA were properly blending kayfabe with real life. And the second Gut Check took place between January 2013 and July 2013. This one was a little different to the first one. You know, in the first one we saw an unsigned wrestler wrestling a signed wrestler, but this one we saw 2 unsigned wrestlers having matches, and then the judges would decide who was better in the match, and then decide whether to sign that person. It was a bit overcomplicated, but, you know, whatever, it's TNA, everything there is overcomplicated. The thing with Gut Check was that usually the decision would be made the week after their matches in an in-ring segment. So they'd have the match, and then the next week there'd be the big dramatic, oh, have they been signed? But it's pretty much just meant that TNA would already have made the decision whether or not to sign them in advance, and would just tell the judges what to say. The judges weren't actually deciding whether to sign them or not. Well, they were, but they weren't. You get what I mean? Because TNA were telling them what to say. But the thing is, even with TNA getting all this time to actually make their decision, the decisions they made were very questionable on who they signed. WWE Tough Enough often gets a bad rep, with many people saying that the winners never do anything, which while that is true, TNA Gut Check is even worse with that. Of the 2 TNA Gut Check series, people who were successful and chosen by the judges, quote unquote, to sign for TNA were Taylor Hendricks, Sam Shaw, Christian York, Wes Briscoe, Alex Silver, Jay Bradley, and Ivelisse. And let me tell you, not a single one of them won a single title in TNA. Like, at least Tough Enough produced John Morrison, for crying out loud. Even Maven won the hardcore title a couple times. TNA didn't have any title holders of their winners. Tough Enough also gets criticism for people who lose ending up becoming big stars in WWE. I mean, look no further than the likes of Miz, Ryback, Velveteen Dream, Mandy Rose, Sonya Deville, and Cameron. All these people didn't win Tough Enough, but fair to say, they went on to do pretty well for themselves in WWE. But even TNA Gut Check had that. Even TNA Gut Check had instances of their runners-up doing far better for themselves. In the first series, Joey Ryan was unsuccessful, but since then has gone viral with his crazy antics and is now signed by TNA and wrestling Ken Shamrock. And in Series 2, Jay Bradley was chosen over Brian Cage. Jay Bradley did absolutely nothing, whereas Brian Cage went on to be signed by Impact and just recently lost the world title. But anyways, I digress. Of all the names I mentioned who won, there was a man named Alex Silver who was successful in making it through and being signed. Alex Silver was the first ever Gut Check participant, and while he succeeded in being signed, it was completely for the wrong reason. Prior to Gut Check, Alex Silver was relatively unknown. He debuted in 2004, wrestling for various indie promotions, and through 2010 to 2011, he made a few appearances in Ring of Honor, pretty much being used as a jobber. He wrestled in OVW between 2010 and 2013, where he actually found a fair bit of success, where he was a 3-time OVW television champion and a 2-time OVW Southern Tag Team champion, along with future Gutcheck winner Sam Shaw. He even made 2 appearances for WWE in 2011, being used as a local talent and being squashed by Brodus Clay in 2 episodes of WWE Superstars. So pretty much prior to Gutcheck, Alex Silva wasn't too known, but that wasn't a problem as most Gutcheck contestants weren't too known, and the whole point of Gutcheck was for these guys to prove themselves to TNA. Well, sort of, but not really, because like I said before, it was pretty much already decided in advance by TNA whether or not they were going to sign him, and the decision by TNA was that they were not going to sign Alex Silva. Keep that in mind, they were not going to sign Alex Silva. Alex Silva faced Robbie E in a losing effort in the first ever Gutcheck match on April 26, 2012, and on the next week on May 3rd, 2012, Alex Silva came out for his live in-ring segment where his fate would be decided. Key word there, live. I previously mentioned that there were 3 judges who chose whether or not the contestants got signed. And who are those judges, you ask? Well, for this first match, it was Bruce Pritchard, Al Snow, and Ric Flair. Notice the emphasis on Ric Flair. The script dictated that Ric Flair would say no, Al Snow would say yes, and Bruce Pritchard would be the final person to make his decision, ultimately saying no. The segment took place and everything that I just mentioned happened. Flair said no and Snow said yes, leaving the final decision to Pritchard. And as I said before, the script was that they were not going to sign him. The reason Snow said yes was purely to get some drama and tension around Pritchard's decision to make it, oh, is he going to say yes or not? He's got the deciding vote. They were not going to sign him. However, before Bruce Pritchard made his decision, Alex Silva was given the opportunity to cut a promo to try and convince Pritchard to say yes and pretty much just give like some inspirational speech. Obviously, Pritchard was going to say no regardless, but this was to add to the drama. But then the unthinkable happened. After Silva cut his promo, Ric Flair went off the script and changed his decision to a yes.
I just changed my vote, you're in.
Meaning that Alex Silva had 2 yeses from Al Snow and Ric Flair, meaning he was signed to TNA regardless of what Pritchard said. The script of giving him 2 no's and 1 yes and not signing him had been flipped on the fly to 3 yeses and being signed, all because of Ric Flair. And yes, he got 3 yeses. After Ric Flair changed his decision to yes, Bruce Pritchard was just like, whatever, I'll just say yes, because it doesn't matter what I say, he's already been signed. After this incident, Ric Flair was replaced as the Gutcheck judge by Taz because, you know, he literally signed someone that TNA didn't want. And this presented TNA with some issues. The first of which is that the segment aired live. I put some emphasis on that word before, and that just meant he was signed no matter what, and they couldn't edit out or reshoot this botch. Also, another problem was that TNA had to go out of their way to acquire a USA work visa for Silva, as Silva had citizenship with Canada and Portugal. And obviously the third and final problem is, TNA didn't want this guy. That's probably the biggest problem of them all. TNA had to sign this guy that they didn't want. Upon being signed, TNA assigned Silva back down to OVW, which was their developmental territory at the time. He was called up on the November 22nd, 2013 episode of Impact, where he lost to Sam Shaw. He wouldn't wrestle again until the January 12th, 2013 tapings of Extravaganza and Joker's World. He competed in 2 matches that night, losing them both, and on June 5th, 2013, his profile on the TNA roster page was removed, ending a very uneventful and accidental career in TNA. So that pretty much sums up the story. Alex Silva was accidentally signed to TNA on their first ever Gutcheck episode. It was this new idea that TNA thought was really revolutionary, and it was botched on the very first time. While he did find success in their developmental territory, he only wrestled 3 times on TNA, losing all of them, and ultimately only stuck around for less than a year. So poor Alex Silva. Let's talk about Scott Hall's short but not so sweet run with the company. In fact, he had many short but not so sweet runs with the company. Hall first started appearing for the company during 2002, the days where they were called NWA TNA, and he would wrestle a few matches on their weekly pay-per-views. He faced the likes of Jeff Jarrett, teamed with Six Pac, aka X Pac, and even faced Ron Killings, aka R-Truth, for the NWA World Heavyweight title, which is one hell of a sentence. I mean, Scott Hall versus R-Truth for a world title. He would return to TNA in 2004 and have a very strange run. Like, really strange. He would align himself with Kevin Nash and Jeff Jarrett to form a stable called the Kings of Wrestling, which did not include Cesaro or Chris Hero. He would wrestle the likes of AJ Styles. Yes, this match actually happened, and Scott Hall won. Yes, Scott Hall faced AJ Styles in 2004 and won. Then, at that year's turning point, the team of Hall, Nash, and Jarrett were defeated by Styles, Jeff Hardy, and wait for it, Randy Savage. Like, what a crazy match. Do you see what I mean when I said his run was just strange? His final match of his run saw him lose to Jeff Hardy at Final Resolution in January of 2005. But alas, he would return once again for another run with the company in 2007, and oh boy, this is where it gets juicy. Going into Genesis 2007, Nash was teaming with Kurt Angle to take on Sting and a mystery partner, and the whole storyline saw Kevin Nash predicting Scott Hall to be Sting's partner, which would lead Scott Hall to return and state that he is in TNA solely to confront Nash. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had an in-ring segment where Hall asked Nash why he wasn't there for him in his troubled past. So, using real-life problems once again with Hall. Brilliant. The two would talk things out, Hall would forgive Nash, the two would embrace in the ring, and Hall would tell him, "I'm not Sting's partner," at Genesis. And then, on the November 29th episode of Impact, Hall, Nash, and Samoa Joe began feuding with the Angle Alliance. And this is where it actually starts to get juicy. The two teams were set to face each other at Turning Point 2007, but just backstage before the match, Samoa Joe was told he had to go into the ring and deliver some news to the fans. Samoa Joe had to go out there and deliver the news to the fans that Scott Hall had no-showed the event and introduce him and Nash's new partner, Eric Young. Joe was pretty much just expected to go out there and give some kayfabe reason why Hall wasn't there, and then introduce Eric Young, but instead, Joe went off. Samoa Joe cut one of the craziest shoot promos and verbally obliterated Scott Hall. He completely buried him, saying that Scott Hall doesn't care about TNA, that he's just there to make money and pick up a check. He talks about a wider problem in TNA of the part-timers coming in there and don't caring, and saying they're taking opportunities away from the guys who do care and want to make name for themselves. And every time he buried the part-timers in the company, he'd turn around and just stare at Nash in the eyes, almost as if it was aimed at him. He put over the likes of the Motor City Machine Guns and put over Eric Young before introducing him, and then the match took place. Samoa Joe, Eric Young, and Kevin Nash would defeat the team of the Angle Alliance, made up of Angle, AJ Styles, and Tomko. But the result of the match really didn't matter, because by the end of the show, all anyone was talking about was Samoa Joe and his promo on Scott Hall. Joe's announcement of Scott Hall not being there went 5 minutes longer than what was planned and had many people in TNA upset with him. At one point in the promo, you even see him talking to someone off screen, asking them if they were angry and that he doesn't care and they can fire him. And who was this person he was talking to? Dixie Carter. He was telling this to Dixie Carter, the literal president of the company. This guy has balls of steel. And another person who was angry was, of course, Kevin Nash. And this is obviously because Nash is good friends with Hall, and because Samoa Joe was also shooting on Kevin Nash in the promo, and that was very easy to tell. After Turning Point went off the air, the two of them supposedly, allegedly, had a very heated exchange backstage. Now, there are different stories that float around regarding this altercation, Kevin Nash claims that he slapped Samoa Joe in the face. Right. Samoa Joe claims that he apologized to Nash and never mentions any sort of physical altercation.
There was an incident where Scott Hall no-showed a pay-per-view. And, I was looked at and I was handed a mic, and they said, get him. I mean, that was the kind of the, and that was all I was told. So I went out there and got him, thinking that, just thinking about, well, hey, if that's what you want, that's what you're going to get. And, I ruffled a lot of feathers that day, and, a lot of people got really, really upset with me, in particular Kevin Nash. But, the thing you got to understand with Kevin, and I totally understand why, and this is really a reason why I apologize to him personally, is that, Kevin knew, and I think everybody saw the Scott Hall special recently, Kevin knew about the demons that Scott was facing. None of us really did. We don't know much about Scott. He showed up here and there, and we didn't know how serious the issue was. And, Kevin, much how I feel about guys like AJ, Daniels, Homicide, Punk, Scott Hall is Kevin's brother, and, he'll love that guy till the day he dies. And, he's made several attempts to save Scott's life, and, he still is today. And, to have a brother like that just torn apart like that, and, it was really hard for him. And knowing Kevin, and I have a really great relationship with Kevin now, and knowing how honest and how true and how much he believes and loves his friends, I couldn't help but apologize, because I understand, the pain and the anguish and all the heartache that he was going through in trying to save Scott's life. And, wrestling's wrestling, and then there's real life. And, I like to think that, I have an appreciation for the problems and the issues that people go through in real life. And I offered my apology to Kevin based on that, because Kevin's an honorable guy, he's a good guy, he's doing everything in his power to save his best friend's life and to do what he needs to do to help Scott. And to have to sit out there and just hear those words, and it was everything that he didn't want to hear. And I can understand why when he's in this battle, and I mean a battle, a literal battle to save your friend's life. So, I mean...
And then AJ Styles too did an interview in which he too never mentions any sort of slap or physical altercation.
Turning Point 2007, it was a Christian Coalition versus Samoa Joe and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. Scott, no-showed the show with Joe, and on his own cuts an impassioned promo ripping on people who don't, put their heart and soul into TNA the way they do and how others do. Kevin Nash gets pissed about this and goes after Joe in the back. As a TNA original, who do you feel was in the right there?
Well, you got to understand what was going on here. Joe didn't do that on his own. They told him to go out there and shoot on them. And Joe, being as passionate as he freaking put it on there. And what he said wasn't wrong, but it was who he's saying it to. Because, while Scott wasn't there, Kevin was standing right there beside him. So I can understand why Kevin would have taken that like, wait, dude, I'm here. And why he would be pissed off. And I don't think that it's accurate to say that Kevin went after Joe. I don't think anybody's went after Joe, but I think they discussed it and finally came to the conclusion like, wait a minute. I was told to say this stuff. And not, it wasn't, I'm not pissed at you, Kevin. And Kevin's like, wait a minute. And they understood that it's almost like they were putting them against each other, to this real life situation. And, once they found out that it was the office, they were like, okay, we're good.
The internet went crazy for Samoa Joe's shoot promo, and many to this day regard it as one of the best shoot promos of recent history. And despite the controversy surrounding Scott Hall and many people in TNA being unhappy with Scott Hall, he would actually return to the company and have one last run with them in 2010. But not only would he have a run in 2010, he would make an appearance at Turning Point 2008, just 1 year on from the same pay-per-view that he no-showed and got buried on. But listen to this. He was shown in the crowd with the Insane Clown Posse. But here's the best part. ICP were asked to be there by TNA. But TNA had no idea that Scott Hall was Insane Clown Posse's guest. So they just showed Scott Hall on TV, not knowing that he was supposed to be there. Because he wasn't supposed to be there. ICP brought him with them as a guest, which is just too funny to me. He would officially make his TNA return on TNA's special 3-hour Monday episode that took place on January 4th, 2010. He would reform an alliance with Kevin Nash and Sean Waltman, calling themselves The Band. Just 1 month later though, Hall and Waltman turned on Nash, beating him down, and Nash would align himself with Eric Young, and the two teams began feuding with each other, with them squaring off at Destination X in March 2010, with the Band's TNA future on the line. Ultimately, however, the Band would win the match after Nash turned on Eric Young to rejoin the group. Yes, all this happened in literally 3 months. He got turned on, made a team with someone else, then turned on that guy and rejoined the same group. But listen, we're not done. The Band would then begin feuding with Team 3D and Eric Young, and this would see Eric Young turn on Team 3D and Eric Young join the Band. I mean, the amount of swerves here is just insane. On a May 13th episode of Impact, Hall and Nash challenged Matt Morgan, just Matt Morgan by himself, to win the TNA World Tag Team Championships. Yes, Razor Ramon and Diesel won tag titles for a major promotion in 2010. Come on. However, this reign would last for less than a month because Scott Hall would make his last appearance for TNA less than a month later on the June 10th episode of Impact, and on the June 14th tapings, the Band was stripped of the titles, and the next day, Hall departed from the company due to his in real life legal problems. So yeah, that's the story of Scott Hall's run in TNA, Samoa Joe's crazy shoot promo, a backstage fight. You know, this story had everything. It had an awful run with some part-timers and some controversy, with a major shoot promo, a backstage fight. It had everything. What a great story this is. We talk about Bubba the Love Sponge versus Awesome Kong. So let's get into this video, shall we? But first of all, you might be wondering, who the hell is Bubba the Love Sponge? So Bubba the Love Sponge, you know, actually, I just can't take that name seriously. Like, do I really have to say Bubba the Love Sponge the entire video? I'm just going to call him Bubba. So Bubba is a radio host who currently works for WWE BA in Tampa, and is the host of the Bubba the Love Sponge show. There we go, I had to say it again. Bubba is also very good friends with Hulk Hogan, who was even the best man in Bubba's second wedding. And speaking of Hulk Hogan, Bubba had some involvement in his sex tape. And how, you ask? He was the one filming it, and also his wife was the person Hulk was sleeping with. So yeah, and I'm already tired of saying the word Bubba, not gonna lie. Bubba has had his fair share of controversy before the Hogan tape on top of it. He's been part of many lawsuits, said some questionable things on his show and online, and even was part of an animal cruelty case back in 2001. But despite all these controversies, Bubba the Love Sponge was signed by TNA as a backstage interviewer in 2010. Obviously the Hogan thing hadn't happened then, but still, with all the controversy surrounding him already up until that point, it was a bit random of TNA to sign him, and it was also very random of TNA to sign him because he was a radio host who had zero link to wrestling whatsoever. So it was a very random signing, but then again, and come to think of it, TNA are the same company that signed Gene Snitsky in 2014, so them signing Bubba the Love Sponge is something I don't put past them. He made his debut on the first episode of the Monday TNA on January 4th, 2010, so you could tell that TNA was really bringing out the big guns to compete with Monday Night Raw. You know, Raw, they got Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. We got Bubba the Love Sponge on TNA. You can already guess what I'm watching, Raw. However, just 2 weeks into his run, Bubba the Love Sponge was already involved in some controversy. On January 12th, a devastating earthquake took place in Haiti, destroying many homes and taking people's lives. And this earthquake caused Bubba to say some very questionable comments, to say the least, on Twitter. He tweeted out saying that he was tired of hearing about relief efforts for the earthquake, and in particular tweeted out the following: "I say, F Haiti, why do we have to take care of everybody? Our country is in shambles." And he also referred to the deaths caused by the earthquake as a cleanse. But despite this, he wasn't let go of TNA even with all this negative press surrounding him and TNA fans calling for him to be fired. But no, TNA stuck with him. However, he was temporarily removed from TV and he was made to apologise for his comments. But just 3 days after the tweet on January 16th, Bubba made a shocking revelation on his radio show. On January 19th, 2010, Bubba claimed on his radio show that he had been attacked by Awesome Kong backstage during an Impact taping the previous day. According to Bubba, Kong, and TNA, the reason that Kong attacked him was due to his comments he made about the Haiti earthquakes. Kong, in an interview with Title Match Media, claimed that she was already on edge with Bubba the Love Sponge and already on edge with TNA for letting him be in the company. She was on the edge with Bubba the Love Sponge due to him using wrestling lingo and feeling disrespected by it because he hasn't been through what she's been through in terms of the damage to her body. She said that if he pushed her buttons one more time and did one more thing that annoyed her, that things would escalate, and the comments that he made about the earthquake pushed her over the edge, and pushed her over the edge in wanting to leave TNA. Later in the day the radio show aired, it was being reported that Kong had asked for her TNA release, but it wasn't granted. Kong was already unhappy in the company, and them keeping around Bubba made her want to leave, evidently. Kong would be suspended from TNA after refusing to take part in TNA's UK tour in January 2010, and the following month, Kong filed a lawsuit against Bubba after he allegedly made a threatening phone call. She stated that someone claiming to be Bubba called her from a private number and allegedly wished death on her and called her the N-word, saying that he wishes she was gone just like the people from Haiti. Bubba would respond and say that this wasn't true and that it was someone else claiming to be him using a private number, and on March 1st, 2010, Kong was finally released from TNA. A week later, her and Hamada were stripped of the Knockouts tag titles after failing to defend them for 30 days. Except they did defend them in a 30-day period. In fact, they had defended them 21 days ago prior, so TNA somehow even screwed that up. Like, it's maths, come on. Like, if you're really struggling with maths, just call Scott Steiner. I mean, he was employed at the time. Bubba would return to TNA in late March as the band's personal interviewer, but just a month later, on April 30th, 2010, he was fired by the company after he and Kong confronted each other on the Cowhead show. He said some very not safe for work things to her, things that I can't play nor transcribe because I'll probably get demonetized. But that was the end of Bubba the Love Sponge in TNA. And that is pretty much the conclusion to the story of Awesome Kong and Bubba the Love Sponge. Easily one of, if not TNA's biggest and most infamous backstage rivalries. A rivalry that literally led to both of them being gone from the company. Awesome Kong, she wanted to leave because it just annoyed her so much that he was there. But then he would be fired just under 2 months after she had left the company due to making some inappropriate comments. Bubba the Love Sponge would continue doing his radio show after being let go of by TNA, whereas Kong would go to WWE as Karma, have 0 matches there other than the Royal Rumble match before being released there. She would return to TNA in 2015, but then would be released in 2016 after another real-life altercation, this time with Rebby Hardy, Matt Hardy's wife. And now she finds herself in All Elite Wrestling in an alliance with Brandy Rhodes, where she returned to wrestling 3 years after being released from TNA. Austin Aries has had a very storied career, and overall, his name is very synonymous with TNA and the indie scene as a whole. He first broke out during his first stint in Ring of Honor in 2004. It would see him capture the world title and even feud with CM Punk in one of Punk's last feuds before he left for WWE. He would also win the tag titles with Roderick Strong, as they were both a part of a stable called Generation Next, also with Alex Shelley and Jack Evans. Crazy to see where everyone in that stable is now. And during this time in Ring of Honor, he would make a one-off appearance for TNA, and he would wrestle a match with Christopher Daniels for the X Division title at Sacrifice to a losing effort. But TNA officials were very impressed, and Aries was not signed to TNA when this match happened. But since the officials were very impressed, they decided to sign him, and he would become full-time with TNA following a scandal with Ring of Honor's owner. And overall, his first run with TNA wasn't actually all that eventful. The only things that really happened was him and Roderick Strong got suspended for 2 months because they were 4 hours late to a show, which, my god. He also rebranded to Austin Starr while in TNA and not Austin Aries, and his final days in TNA saw him get a 90-day suspension before getting released in 2007. The reason for the suspension supposedly stemmed from TNA asking him to shoot a vignette promo on what Aries believed was his day off, and though he would shoot the promo, TNA saw this as bad attitude and suspended him, and during his suspension, he would request his release, and it was granted. Aries would go back to Ring of Honor between 2007 and 2010, where he would be the first person to ever become a 2-time Ring of Honor World Champion when he won the belt in 2009. He would leave the company in October 2010, and as he was being successful in Ring of Honor, TNA saw it in him and thought, hey, let's bring him back, so he made his return to TNA in 2011, and this run would last between 2011 and 2015, and this was the run where he would become one of TNA's biggest stars and really make a name for himself within TNA. During this time, he wrestled as Austin Aries and not Austin Starr, and really he just dominated every division he was in. He won the world title, he won the X Division title 6 times, and was also the tag champion with Bobby Roode. He would leave TNA in 2015 after a very successful run, and a run that made his name synonymous when talking about TNA, and he would then join WWE NXT in 2016, and you know, his WWE run was, it was weird. He made his debut, and his first feud was with Baron Corbin, which he would win when he defeated him at NXT TakeOver Dallas, and from there he would feud with Nakamura because Aries wants to face the NXT champion, but Nakamura wanted it too, so they had a match at NXT TakeOver The End, which Shinsuke did win. Aries would turn heel and would feud with Noe Jose. Yes, Noe Jose, because he was actually kind of a thing in NXT and actually kind of over, and he would defeat him at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn too. Unfortunately, Aries would get injured in October, and this would lead to him transitioning to a commentary role for 205 Live, but of course he would return to the ring, and he would return as a wrestler for 205 Live rather than NXT. He turned babyface and would begin feuding with Neville for the Cruiserweight title. And I really look at this era as kind of the prime of the Cruiserweight division, with Neville as champion, feuding with Aries. He challenged him at WrestleMania 33 first, which was a match I was there for live in the stadium, and it was damn good, you know. Neville did win that match, but Austin Aries would challenge him another 2 times on pay-per-view for the title at Payback and Extreme Rules, but once again, he never actually captured the title. And then seemingly out of nowhere, Aries was released from his WWE contract on July 7th. Many fans were confused because he was a good wrestler, good on the mic, over, and just got out a prominent title feud that had him wrestling on pay-per-views. However, reports came out that Aries was not that liked backstage and had quite a bad attitude. So just from that you can see a bit of a pattern with his backstage attitude. But it was okay because Aries would once again return to Impact, this time in 2018, and would very quickly capture both the Impact World title as well as the Grand Championship. Remember that title? Future video on that. He would feud with El Patron, the Lucha Bros, and retain the title in these feuds in very good matches, though he did actually lose the title to Pentagon at one point, but would win it back very shortly, and Pentagon had a very bad world title reign, one of the worst in Impact history. He would then begin a feud with Johnny Impact, aka John Morrison, aka... Okay, I'm not doing that again, whatever. And this is where it gets interesting, and this is the main story of the video. The feud began to blur the lines a lot, with some very heated Twitter exchanges between the two, which saw a mad tweet in particular from Austin Aries' side. Johnny tweeted out making fun of Aries' height, which prompted this response from Aries. the form of discrimination that's still super cool. Short shaming. If I joked race, retards, your gay look, if I fat shamed your husky wife, instant outrage. But you can just predictably cut on me over my height, genetics I don't control, and it's just funny. This tweet would be deleted the next morning after Don Callis supposedly had to call Aries to tell him to delete it. And Aries would clarify later in an interview with the Wrestling Observer, saying he doesn't condone the use of any of these words, and the point he was trying to make was that he could use any of these words and people would be outraged, but no one cares when Johnny Impact does this cheap short shaming. Johnny and Austin had their match at Bound for Glory 2018 for the world title, with Johnny ultimately beating Aries for the title. But it's what happened after the match that really had people talking about it. Don't get me wrong, the match was good, but everything that happened after it was very, very eventful. Johnny Impact won the match with a Starship Pain to get the 3 count, but after that 3 count, Aries immediately got up and left the ring, basically no selling the move. On the way out, he flipped off the fans and cursed at Don Callis, and everyone was so confused. It was unknown whether or not this was a work or not, due to the nature of the feud, which really saw the lines very much blurred, but then people on one hand also thought, hey, this might be a shoot because of Austin Aries' really bad backstage attitude. But afterwards, Aries was never seen in Impact, and reports claimed that Bound for Glory was the last date on his contract. And this would suggest that this might be a work, but to this day it still remains a mystery whether or not it was. Johnny Impact did an interview in December 2018 in which he says he believes Aries has deep-seated issues within himself and that Aries didn't handle himself well that night, which would suggest that yeah, maybe it is a shoot. But then Aries himself did an interview just 2 months ago where he claims that he pitched the idea to walk out after the match because he was planning on coming back to Impact and extending his contract and wanted suspense around his return. It should be noted though that he never actually mentioned if this pitch was accepted by higher ups or not, and also he went on to crap talk the Starship Pain, saying that it's a very weak finisher. He said he didn't actually no-sell it because he was down for the 1-2-3, but he got up for the 4-5-6. This interview was very weird. To this day in 2019, it's still not known whether or not this was a shoot, but regardless of whether or not it is, it's still a very bad look on the company, because on one hand you've just let this guy walk out, on the other hand you have, you know, if you've done it on purpose and if it's a work, then it's just stupid, it's just a bad angle. And with conflicting reports such as the Johnny Impact interview where he says he thinks it's a shoot, but then Aries saying he pitched it, but then everything suggesting it could be a work, but then Aries' backstage attitude suggesting it could be a shoot, it's very complicated. And it remains unsolved whether or not this was a shoot or not. Christy Hemme began her wrestling career in the 2004 WWE Diva Search, which she won. She was signed to the WWE, where she stayed until the end of 2005 when she was released from her WWE contract on her own terms. She never really did much in the WWE apart from winning the Diva Search, and her run there in the company wasn't really all too memorable. Christy Hemme would sign with TNA in 2006, becoming the manager for the Rock and Rave Infection, being involved in their feuds with the likes of LAX and the Voodoo Kin Mafia, wrestling a few matches here and there, mainly tag matches where she was teaming with the Rock and Rave Infection of Lance Hoyt and Jimmy Rave. In 2008, she would slowly start drifting away from the Rock and Rave Infection and start involving herself in singles competition and become a straight-up wrestler rather than a manager or a valet. During her time as a singles wrestler, she feuded with the likes of the Beautiful People, but she was mainly used as a jobber and lost most of the matches that she was in. On December 10th, 2009, Christy Hemme would debut in a new role as a backstage interviewer, and 6 days later announced her retirement from in-ring competition. Christy Hemme was really good in this role as a backstage interviewer. It really suited her, she was very natural, and it seemed she was almost made to do announcing work. Which she did, as on the April 28th, 2011 episode of Impact, Christy Hemme would officially debut as an in-ring announcer, which again, she was very good at. So yeah, that's about as much backstory we need for Christy Hemme going into the main story in this video. Let's talk about Austin Aries, a man who needs no introduction to any TNA fan, but also a man who is someone who was no short of controversy during his time in wrestling. There are many reports of him being troublesome backstage and having an awful backstage attitude, so much so that he was supposedly released from the WWE for having an awful backstage attitude just after he was done with a program with Neville competing for a title in 2017. He's also had his fair share of controversy in TNA. Just look at that moment with him and John Morrison from 2018. In fact, I made a video on that, which you can go and watch if you'd like. But despite his backstage attitude, there's no doubt he's one of the best TNA wrestlers of all time. He's a multi-time TNA World Champion, X Division Champion, Tag Champion, and even Grand Champion. And he was all this while still putting on awesome matches. He began his TNA career in 2005, staying until 2007, and he'd make his return to the company in 2011, where he would have his second run with the company. That would be the more well-known run, where he was just awesome. He won the X Division title in September of that year, and would have his famous record-breaking near year-long reign, which can be argued is one of the best title reigns in TNA history. And this reign would be where Option C was introduced, the rule that you can vacate the X Division title in exchange for a world title shot. Aries used Option C to end his record-breaking 301-day reign and challenged Bobby Roode at Destination X 2012 to win the world title. He would hold the world title for 98 days before losing it to Jeff Hardy at Bound for Glory 2012. He would spend the next few months feuding with Hardy to try and regain the title, with people like Aces and Eights, Buddy Ray, and Bobby Roode getting involved in the feud. I just realised that rhymed, haha, so funny. On January 25th, 2013, while TNA was taping in Manchester in the UK, my hometown, Bobby Roode and Austin Aries began teaming together kind of out of nowhere and challenged Hernandez and Chavo Guerrero for the tag team titles, which they won, which was cool. Aries and Roode, despite feuding with each other the year previously, made a pretty good tag team. It was just a tag team of two top heels, and they were pretty darn good. They would hold the titles for a couple months before losing them on April 11th, but they would continue teaming here on out, and this is where the incident would take place. On the May 9th, 2013 episode of Impact, Christy Hemme was in the ring, announcing the entrances for Austin Aries and Bobby Roode, who were coming out to the ring for their match with Bad Influence, aka Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian. Austin Aries and Bobby Roode entered first, but Christy Hemme botched the announcement. She accidentally announced that Kazarian and Daniels were the ones entering. Rather than ignoring it, Aries and Roode decided to play their heel characters and roll with it and try to make the best out of the situation and make it look like it was not a botch, putting on disgusted faces when they heard Kaz and Daniels being announced, and Aries in particular walked ahead of Roode into the ring to corner Christy Hemme. He made her re-announce them as Austin Aries and Bobby Roode. So far, it's all well and good. I mean, Aries is playing that heel character role, but then, while Aries was still cornering Christy, he proceeded to stand on the middle turnbuckle to taunt the crowd, effectively putting his crotch in Christy Hemme's face, who was visibly and audibly uncomfortable. The match went on as normal, and at first it seemed like an awkward moment, but a lot would happen the next day and the days following. Following the show, Christy Hemme took to Twitter replying to a fan asking if Aries had put her nuts in her face, saying, "Yes, unacceptable." And following this tweet, SE Scoops reached out to a source within TNA asking if Hemme was genuinely bothered by what happened, and they replied saying, quote, "Of course she was. How would you react? It's one thing if that was set up as a work earlier in the day, and even then our girls would have to reassure our agents over and over again that they would be okay with that spot before it got approved for television." The source also added that they believed Christy Hemme was technically sexually assaulted. Austin Aries would get lots of backlash from all ends of the wrestling world. He was fined by TNA, and he privately apologized to Christy Hemme, who was satisfied with the apology, and the two made amends, and afterwards Aries would also make a public apology. In a 2019 interview with Chris Van Vliet in December, Aries recalls the moment and everything that happened afterwards.
Do it again. I think I said, do it again right. And she goes, ah. And she says the name, and I stand on the second rope, and I do my pose. And, you know, I try to give her as much clearance as possible. I didn't think about heights or I didn't think all this thing through. But I wasn't acknowledging her. It was like she was now vanished. And I assumed she would just vanish if she didn't want to be there. That's not what happened. She kind of was obviously kind of like, what the fuck? And she kind of like tapped my leg, and I hopped off, and I just stayed in character, and that was it. And
it was all very quick when you watch it back.
It's like 2 seconds, you know? And so I didn't think much of it. You know, I just figured like, okay, cool. Like we got some heat. I was just kind of a dick. Like I got to the back, and no one said anything. Went through the rest of the taping. No one made any mention of it, that there was any issue. I got home, and then the next day I got a call from the office saying I was going to be fined $5,000 for the incident with Christy. And I was like, whoa, like what incident with Christy? And like, well, the thing was like, whoa, I didn't even know that was an issue. Like, why didn't anybody say anything to me? You know, like I was there the whole fucking day, and no one came up and said what. I was like, yo, and it was Al Snow. And I just said, hey, Al, let me call Christy and like talk to her. I certainly wasn't trying to offend her or whatever. And so I called her. We talked for 20 minutes, and she, you know, I explained kind of where I was at, and I apologized if, you know, she fell or whatever, you know, and I wish she would have came and said something to me. And she kind of told me where her mindset was. Initially, she wasn't, but as the day went on and people were kind of coming up to her, she started thinking more about it, and just, you know, and I get, and I can understand too, like, you know, being a woman in the business, like maybe some things can trigger you, and maybe it's not initially, or maybe when people start coming up and go, are you okay? Like, do you feel this way? And you start thinking about it, you know, whatever. Like, I get it. She explained her part. I explained mine. I told her I didn't have any issue with her professionally. It wasn't anything to do. And it was cool. And we ended the conversation in good terms and all good. So
in this interview, Aries also claims that Dixie had written a public apology for him to use. He claims that it was absolutely awful, and it said, quote, something like, I want to apologize for my bad behavior against Christy Hemme, which Aries in the interview openly mocked. Aries would continue appearing on TV afterwards. He was not suspended, and luckily for TNA, this wasn't too big of a PR shitstorm for them. Overall, my thoughts on the whole ordeal was that I get Aries was trying to play the heel, and I thought, you know, fair enough to him trying to play the heel, make the botch not look that bad, but at the same time, I think cornering Christy Hemme was a bit far, and of course, even if it wasn't intentional, putting his crotch in her face was uncomfortable for Christy. At the end of the day, no matter what your opinion of the whole thing is, if Christy Hemme felt uncomfortable with it, then she's entitled to that, and Aries was in the wrong. So to summarize, a very awkward botch leads to a very awkward moment where Christy Hemme feels uncomfortable, Aries is forced to apologize, lots of bad PR for TNA, but luckily it wasn't too damaging to them, and they were able to almost just continue as normal. Jeff Hardy has had a very storied career, having multiple runs in the WWE, TNA, and the Indies. He first debuted for the WWF in 1994 and spent the next 3 years appearing on and off for the company as a jobber before finally signing a contract to the company in 1998 along with his brother Matt. The two would of course start teaming together and go on to become the Hardy Boys, and would spend the next 2 years putting on classic after classic in the very famous Triangle Ladder and Triangle TLC matches with Edge and Christian and the Dudley Boys. Him and Matt of course won the tag titles a couple times and had very quickly cemented themselves as one of the top wrestling tag teams in the business. But alas, all tag teams don't last forever, and after years of competing in the tag division, Jeff started competing in the singles division, notably having his match with The Undertaker for the Undisputed Championship, which is probably the match that made him famous and having become a crowd fan favourite. After about a year in the singles division, with stints in the European Championship division, Intercontinental Championship division, and the Hardcore division, Hardy was released from the company on April 22nd, 2003. The reasons for Hardy's release from the company came down to his drug abuse, no showing events, refusing to go to rehab, among other things. And in 2004, TNA would sign him to a contract, which was a very controversial move, given that the man realistically needed help and shouldn't be wrestling in a company and should rather be in rehab. But this wouldn't be the first time TNA would do something like this. He spent the next 2 years in TNA and proved himself to be unreliable when it came to coming up to events once again, no showing 2 events, the second of which saw him get suspended and never appear for the company again after, until he returned 4 years later. We'll get onto that though. He would return to the WWE in 2006, teaming with his brother Matt Hardy and having reigned with the tag titles once again, and once again they would of course split off into their own ways and in the singles division, and Jeff would really get back on track with the singles division, becoming a major fan favourite and winning the Intercontinental title. However, it appeared Jeff's demons had not disappeared, as in late July, Jeff Hardy was abruptly removed from WWE programming. Hardy stated on his website that he was healing injuries. However, many news sources reported that he had been suspended for his first violation of the wellness policy. He would conveniently return about 30 days later to the company, and then about 8 months later in March 2008, Jeff had to drop the Intercontinental Championship due to being suspended once again. However, WWE would still continue to push Hardy despite these issues though, which is a testament to Hardy's talent and popularity. He won the WWE title at the end of 2008, and throughout 2009 feuded with CM Punk for the World Heavyweight Championship in a really awesome feud, which saw each of them exchanging the belt between each other. In August of 2009, Hardy departed from the WWE once again. This time it was just to heal injuries, so it was very likely that we could see him in the WWE again quite soon when his injuries were healed. However, just a month after being released from the WWE, Jeff Hardy was busted by the police and arrested on a variety of drug-related charges, including drug trafficking, which basically hindered any chances of WWE re-signing him again. So you'd think after all this that TNA wouldn't sign him again, and just let him get help, right? Or at least give him the help? Wrong. On the January 4th, 2010 edition of Impact, Hardy made his return to the company. At this point, it wasn't really surprising that TNA had signed him, as they now had a history of signing people who needed to be in rehab and not a major wrestling company. They had already signed Jeff in 2004, which proved to be a very bad decision, and they very infamously signed Kurt Angle in 2006 after he was released from the WWE after refusing to go to rehab, a move that garnered a lot of criticism for TNA. Jeff Hardy was immediately placed into the main event scene, wrestling the likes of RVD, Mr. Anderson, AJ Styles, and competing in the Lethal Lockdown match. At Bound for Glory that year, Jeff Hardy turned heel along with Hogan and Bischoff and defeated Mr. Anderson and Kurt Angle to win the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. Following this, Jeff Jarrett and Abyss would join their ranks and Immortal was formed. This was the first time Jeff Hardy had played a heel in a singles role, and he had become a darker character, and it was quite interesting to see what Hardy was doing. At Turning Point, Jeff Hardy retained the title against Matt Morgan, who was serving as a replacement for Mr. Anderson, who was injured. This would start a feud between Morgan and Hardy, leading to a match at Final Resolution, and this is where things get interesting. Sorry for the long wait before we got here, but I had to give that backstory. On the day of Final Resolution 2010, the wrestling news world went down under and went crazy when it was reported that Jeff Hardy could potentially be getting pulled from the show. Mike Johnson of PW Insider reported, quote, "There are conflicting reports making the rounds, but as of 20 minutes ago, PW Insider received word backstage from one source that TNA champion Jeff Hardy was going to be pulled from tonight's pay-per-view and sent home due to concern about his behavior backstage after arriving at the event. I was later told that Hardy is still working the pay-per-view by another source, but the second source conceded that while had been discussions of changing the card for tonight's show, the entire issue was an overblown misunderstanding and everything was fine with Hardy. Hardy is scheduled for his next hearing on his numerous drug charges this Wednesday in Moore County in North Carolina." The report going around was that Hardy could potentially be getting sent home from the pay-per-view and the main event would be changed due to his backstage behavior. Details were vague, but Hardy was given the okay to perform, and he did. He faced Matt Morgan in the main event of the show. Anyway, let's talk about the match itself. It's a no DQ match. Jeff Hardy, Matt Morgan for the TNA World title with Mr. Anderson as a special guest referee. And in the match, Jeff Hardy was not noticeably in a bad condition. He was not noticeably intoxicated or anything like that. However, the match was very slow and it was not a great match. Ultimately, Hardy won the match after Jackson James came out as a replacement referee and counted the 3 for Hardy. A lot of the match was very slow, like I said, lots of rest holds, lots of time spent just lying on the floor selling moves. Overall, I'd give the match 1.5 stars, but just to reiterate, Hardy did not look like he was in bad condition. It just looked like a bad match. Following the show, more updates on Hardy's condition came out. James Caldwell of PW Torch reported hours after the event that, quote, in the hours leading up to the event, TNA was set to pull Hardy from the pay-per-view lineup. Sources say Hardy was hammered backstage. Hardy's backstage condition was reportedly not considered grounds for termination, as TNA was only deciding whether or not to pull Hardy from the pay-per-view. After considering potential replacement matches and stripping Hardy of the TNA title with a storyline explanation, TNA decided to stick with the original pay-per-view lineup and Hardy vs Morgan in the main event. However, when journalists and websites asked TNA for comments, TNA said the whole thing was just a misunderstanding, and Jeff Hardy was just exhausted as the company had just finished a tour of Dubai, contradicting the reports from journalists. However, once again, another conflicting report came out, this time from Dave Meltzer. Here's a quote from Cageside Seats on what Meltzer had to say. Quote, Dave Meltzer gave more details on his subscriber-only radio show. Most notably, he discussed how his TNA sources are now scrambling to downplay the incident, telling him it's not as bad as it sounds, and blaming exhaustion on his recent trip to Abu Dhabi. Meltzer didn't buy the exhaustion excuse, because he's been back in America for several days, and WWE wrestlers often have much less time to recover from an international trip before performing on home soil again. I don't either. Given Jeff Hardy's track record, even during his last WWE run, when he was on his best behavior, he failed 2 drug tests and was even refused to board a flight for being intoxicated. And the fact that exhaustion is such a frequently used code word in the entertainment business for someone who is messed up and needs help. I cannot stress this enough, but take these reports as you will. Nothing to this day has ever been confirmed, so don't take anything said by anyone in this whole debacle as facts. Nothing's been confirmed about Hardy's condition backstage on the day of Final Resolution 2010, and most likely we never will know. The fact is though that Hardy was able to go out there and have a match, albeit not a good match, but it was still a match regardless. I'm not going to sit here and make conspiracy theories regarding a man's health, but you can choose what you want to believe, and for now, and probably forever, this entire thing at Final Resolution 2010, this entire incident will probably remain a mystery. The obvious one to point towards is Sting versus Jeff Hardy at Victory Road 2011. But to me, as bad as it was, it's not like they were trying to put on a good match. They went out there and ended it early because of Jeff's condition, and to me that doesn't make it the worst match because they weren't trying to put on a good one in the first place. There are other matches where arguments can be made for them, including some of TNA's wild and crazy stipulation matches, such as the Reverse Battle Royal matches, which you can check out on my channel where I did a review of them, or the Electric Steel Cage, which a video on will be coming soon because I need to cover that. But to me, they didn't even come close to how tragic the match we're talking about in this video was. That match is Jenna Maraska versus Shar Mel from Victory Road 2009, which is an event that many people consider to be the worst TNA pay-per-view of all time. 250 likes and I'll review it. Let's give a bit of background on Sharmell and Jenna Maraska first though, talk about how their feud and storyline came to be. Starting off with Sharmell. Sharmell first got involved in the wrestling bubble when she became a Nitro Girl for WCW in 1998. She would also be involved in a few storylines, such as being the valet for the Artist, and even wrestled a singles match against Tammy Lynn Sitch, aka Sunny, which, to be honest, I haven't watched the match, but I can't imagine it to be that good. During this time in WCW is where she would also meet and begin dating Booker T, which, how wholesome. She would leave WCW in 2001 to join the WWE and would spend a year in OVW before actually retiring from the wrestling business, which is something I never even knew before researching this video. She retired in order to run a clothing store in Texas, but this is wrestling. Like, come on. Nobody ever truly retires from wrestling, and she was rehired by the WWE in 2005 and would become the manager for her now husband, Booker T. Her and Booker T were a really good pairing. They were great together, and Sharmell was a fantastic manager. In 2006, she would redub to Queen Sharmell following Booker T's King of the Ring win and his redub to King Booker, and this, in my eyes, was probably my favourite phase of Booker T and Sharmell, especially from Booker's end. They were just so brilliant, and Booker nailed the King Booker character. However, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, as in October 2007, Sharmell and Booker both requested their release from WWE due to them having issues with the directions of their characters, and thus were granted their releases from the WWE. And from there, TNA did what they do best. And what I mean by that is they signed two former WWE wrestlers, because that's what they do. Booker T and Sharmell debuted for TNA at Genesis 2007. Booker was revealed as Sting's mystery partner in a tag team match against Kurt Angle and Kevin Nash, and Sharmell made her debut the same night, interfering in the match by attacking Karen Angle. What's interesting about Sharmell's run is, despite the fact that she's not a wrestler, she wrestled a few matches. Her debut match saw her and Booker defeat Robert Roode and Miss Brooks at Final Resolution in January 2008, and the pair would defeat Roode and Miss Brooks again in a match at Lockdown of that same year. From there, she'd wrestle more matches from time to time, but none of the matches she wrestled were singles matches, and they were mainly tag matches, sometimes involving Booker, and this was probably the right way to do it so that she's protected and not being exposed in the ring. In October 2008, Booker T joined the Main Event Mafia, one of TNA's most infamous stables, and Sharmell followed suit as an associate to the stable, but there was another associate of the Main Event Mafia who was a woman by the name of Jenna Maraska. So let's talk about Jenna Maraska now. Jenna made her debut in pro wrestling on the March 12th, 2009 episode of Impact. Yes, not her TNA debut, her pro wrestling debut. Jenna was not a wrestler. In fact, she had no involvement in wrestling prior to this. She was a reality TV star, mainly known for competing in Survivor. Jenna Maraska was revealed as the financial backer to the Main Event Mafia, which established Maraska as a heel. Why is a reality TV star in a stable of former world champions that are meant to be taken seriously? Why? Maraska and Sharmell were regularly seen arguing, and it would lead to them coming to blows on the May 28th, 2009 episode of Impact, and a match between the two was announced for Victory Road 2009, and it was revealed that Jenna was being trained by Awesome Kong for this match. And so, I think it's about time we talk about the match now. Now that we've given the background on the two wrestlers in it, in quotes, and kind of talked about the feud and storyline, let's just get into this. I don't even want to talk about this. Jenna Maraska vs Sharmell took place on July 19th, 2009 at Victory Road, with Jenna being accompanied by Awesome Kong and Sharmell being accompanied by Sojourner Bolt. I've never known how to pronounce that. I'm just going to call her Sojo for the sake of it. Jenna Maraska is a reality TV star. Sharmell is a manager. neither of them are wrestlers. At least Sharmell had wrestled in some matches, and I will say she looked a lot better than Jenna in this match, who was terrible. Jenna was so terrible in this match, and this truly was the worst TNA match of all time, and the worst that I've ever seen. The crowd booed the entire match. It featured some of the worst offense and sequences I've ever seen, especially from Jenna's part, who couldn't do anything, probably because she's not a wrestler, and she got blown up so quick. I mean, to be fair, one of the worst spots of the match didn't even involve Jenna and Sharmell. Sojo got in the ring, got tossed onto Kong on the outside, who was obviously meant to catch her, but she didn't, and she just let Sojo take a hard bump to the outside and couldn't care less. The finish saw Kong give Sharmell a very weak karate chop. Jenna did some sort of lap dance before pinning her, and then won the match in 5 minutes and 49 seconds. If anything, it was 5 minutes and 49 seconds too long. Brian Alvarez of the Wrestling Observer labelled Victory Road 2009 as the worst pay-per-view of the year, and it was mainly outspoken about the Jenna vs Sharmell match. He infamously gave the match a rating of -5 stars and labelled it as the worst women's wrestling match of all time. To which I say, I agree. This match was one of 2 women's matches on the show. The other one was Angelina Love vs Tara, which only went 2 minutes longer than this one. And something I'll always praise TNA for is that they were treating their Knockouts division a lot better than WWE was treating their women's division for a very long time. But the way they treated their women's division tonight was inexcusable and unacceptable. Like, honestly, I'm not even exaggerating there. They should be ashamed how they treated their women's division on this show. This match was never going to be good, and I don't understand how TNA never saw that, because it could be seen from a mile away that this was never going to be a good match. Jenna was not a wrestler. She had no involvement in wrestling and had no place being anywhere near a wrestling show. And Sharmell was a manager, not a wrestler, and when she did wrestle, it was in tag matches where she was protected. You know, I think Sharmell could have wrestled in singles matches, but she needs a good opponent who can help carry the match a little bit. And I don't think Jenna Maraska is that person. You know, I really don't. Couldn't think why though. Sharmell definitely did a lot better than Jenna did in the match, but it wasn't enough to stop this from being an absolute train wreck. This is the first show following TNA Genesis 2010, so this is making it the first Impact following the change to the 4-sided ring, and also since Sean Morley beat Christopher Daniels and squashed him in one of my least favourite matches in TNA history. Maybe one day I'll talk about that. God, I hate that match. It's also the first Impact since AJ and Flair aligned themselves together, and it's the 5th TNA show in total that Hulk Hogan has overseen. Ric Flair is out to start the show, and he explains that he is in TNA to continue his lifelong feud with Hulk Hogan. Here we go again. And Flair says that AJ Styles is the next Ric Flair. He begins telling the story of how he made it to TNA, and this promo really just goes on, and he really does ramble until AJ finally comes out. He tries to cut a Flair style promo, and it just felt awkward to me. Like, it wasn't bad, but this just wasn't AJ Styles whatsoever. Angle then comes out along with Hulk Hogan, and Hogan says that he runs the show and that tonight Angle will face AJ for the title once again, and Flair is not allowed to interfere like he did at Genesis. But for our first match of the night, we have another Genesis rematch as the British Invasion of Doug Williams and Magnus are looking to regain their titles from Matt Morgan and Hernandez. I forgot this team existed. Pretty average match here. The main thing to discuss is the finish though, as Rob Terry throws his Feast or Fired case to Magnus, who accidentally hits Williams, and then Hernandez pins Williams to win, and Magnus doesn't break up the pinfall, and then they start blaming Rob Terry, even though Magnus was completely at fault. And then Mick Foley comes out and he beats them all up with a steel chair and shouts to the camera that he's going to see Eric Bischoff later tonight. Next up we have Orlando Jordan. He is up against the Pope, D'Angelo Dinero. Thank God someone good is actually in this match. Pope is so damn charismatic and he looks really good in this match, so of course they give Orlando the win after getting barely any offense in. Ugh. TNA 2010 booking never ceases to amaze me. I didn't realise this show had 2 Orlando screwjobs. We get an interview with Angle about his match with AJ tonight where he condemns him and Flair, and then Eric Young and Nash are shown discussing their match tonight with the Nasty Boys. Yes, that is a match that's actually happening. Next up, we got some knockouts action as it's Madison Rayne of the Beautiful People versus Angelina Love, formerly of the Beautiful People, who only just returned to TNA the week before. The match is very short and Angelina wins. The match went on for about a minute, and then afterwards Angelina chokes out Madison with her shirt and takes down the Beautiful People, but the numbers game is too much for her as she's beaten down by all 3 of them, who all choke her out with the ugly stick. This whole segment plus match lasted about 3 minutes in total, and that is all the knockouts representation we got on this show. The tag champions weren't there, the knockouts champion wasn't there, this was all the knockouts action on this show, and I thought AEW was bad for their women's division's treatment. Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff come out next. They said they've got some things to address and that things are moving quickly in TNA and they need to address it right now. The band then come out and Hogan tells Hall and Waltman to hit the road because they don't work here. And then Mick Foley then comes out as he wants to talk to Bischoff and he says he will see him in his office, and then we cut away. We see Hall and Waltman being escorted out the building and Nash says that he will sort it out. But up next, Nash will be wrestling as it's the Nasty Boys versus Kevin Nash and TNA Global Champion Eric Young. This was one of the most nothing matches. It felt very uneventful, had no reason to happen, and no reason to be on the show. And the worst part of it, the Nasty Boys won. How on earth were the Nasty Boys even in TNA in 2010, let alone winning matches against Eric Young and Kevin Nash? Oh yeah, and then after the match, during the break, Team 3D just decided to destroy them with chair shots to the head. Bloody hell, they're like 70. Next up, Mr. Anderson. Anderson is out, and he will be speaking for the first time since his debut at Genesis. He says he isn't in TNA because of people's Twitters, emails, and text messages, which I would love to know who's texting him and how the hell they got his number. He starts talking about beating the monster Abyss, who comes up from behind him, and Mr. Anderson starts calling him stupid and just calling him names as Abyss just listens from behind and eventually beats him down. He goes to the Black Hole Slam, but Anderson is able to escape. We then see Bischoff and Foley finally talking. Foley is furious. He says he hates how Bischoff has taken his job and hates what Bischoff is doing with TNA. And then the cameraman is asked to leave because apparently it's about to get intense. And so we don't even get to see what happens. The cameraman just leaves and Bischoff shuts the door. But anyway, the main event is next, and it's Kurt Angle versus AJ Styles for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. This is surely going to be a good match, so maybe this can save this pretty awful show. And luckily, this was a very good match. Not as good as the other matches the two of them have had, but that's to be expected as this was a TV match, not a pay-per-view match. But still, a really good match. The two of them are the best TNA has to offer at this time, and they just had great chemistry, and for a TV match, it was really good. But the main thing to talk about is the finish of this match, and that's where the title of this video will finally come into play. Angle has the angle lock locked in into AJ, but AJ rolls out and locks in his own angle lock, and then Earl Hebner rings the bell immediately, which I didn't even realize Earl Hebner was of course the same ref from the Montreal Screwjob. The fans chant BS and Hebner hands AJ the title and Angle is fuming. Hogan comes out, Angle is pissed that Hogan let it happen and says, and I quote, "I don't need this, SHIT. I can go back to WWE. This is BS. I quit. And then spits on Hogan. Angle continues swearing at Hogan and the fans are chanting "You screwed Kurt." Angle is furious. The commentators are now speculating whether Hogan was involved in it. And then after Angle has left, Bischoff walks out with blood all over him and gets on the mic and says, "Mick Foley, you are fired." And that's how the show ends. What just happened? this has to be the most elaborate screwjob recreation I've ever seen. Now, they've done it in WWE before, but they've never done it to the point where Kurt Angle was swearing to the point it looked like he was shooting, saying he was going to go back to WWE, looking like he was actually cutting a shoot promo, spitting on the authority figure just like Brett did to Vince, the same referee as well. Like, it had all the details. But overall, the show was a complete stinker. First of all, let's talk about Cookiegate. A very odd name, I know, but there is meaning behind it. Let's explain what Cookiegate actually is and how it involves the WWE. So let's go to TNA Victory Road 2004, TNA's first ever 3-hour monthly pay-per-view. Basically the first ever traditional pay-per-view after finally abandoning the weekly pay-per-view format. This can be considered the first ever TNA pay-per-view in a way. On the card, it was a very decent card. You had a 20-man X Division gauntlet match, an 8-man tag with Ron Killings, Eric Watts, The Naturals, etc. Mascarita Sagrada against Purita Morgan, I have no idea who that is. 3 Live Crew against Team Canada, Stephanie Trinity versus Jacqueline, Monty Brown versus Raven and Abyss in a Monsters Ball, P.E. Williams versus AJ Styles, America's Most Wanted versus Triple X, and Jeff Jarrett versus Jeff Hardy. But we're not here to talk about the card or whatever. Maybe one day in the future I'll do a review of it. It seems like a fun little card. It's the first ever TNA pay-per-view. Maybe we'll review it for a video in the future. Anyway, I'm rambling. We're not here to talk about the wrestling that took place on the pay-per-view. We're here to talk about a very infamous segment that took place on this show. That, of course, being Cookiegate. Basically, TNA filmed a video where they had their wrestlers visit some WWE personnel who were filming a commercial at Universal Studios and decided to give them some cookies. You know what? My words don't do it justice. How about we just watch it? Hey guys, originally the video was going to have me reacting to Cookiegate, but I've tried to upload this video 5 times now and it keeps getting copyright claimed because I'm showing footage of it. So instead, let me just walk you through it with some images playing. I know it's peak, but I just can't get around copyright right now, so I'm really sorry. Basically, they cut backstage where Dusty Rhodes says, "Play Cookiegate." We then see one man, I think he's an interviewer, along with Tracy Brooks, who has cookies, and Abyss, who has balloons. And they say they're going to introduce WWE to a real wrestling company. We then see 3 Live Crew, aka Road Dogg and Ron the Truth Killings, or R-Truth, talking to some faces who are blurred out, probably for legal reasons, they couldn't show the faces. But Road Dogg is basically just saying, "Hey, where's Vince? Where's Vince? He owes me money, yada yada yada." And it's really, really awkward. They offer them some cookies, they just mock WWE and kind of just say like, "Oh yeah, TNA superior, yeah, yeah, yeah." And it's really, really awkward. And that is pretty much what Cookiegate was. So that was interesting, and that was the first real time that WWE was mentioned and made the entire focus of a TNA segment, but boy oh boy, do we have more to come. Let's fast forward to 2006 and check in with the Voodoo Kin Mafia, formerly known as Billy Gunn and Road Dogg, aka the New Age Outlaws. They were now known as Kip James and BG James, now known as the Voodoo Kin Mafia. And if you don't get why they were called that, just read the initials of it. VKM, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, you got me? Whatever. But there was a segment where they actually took on the VKM name, and there is a whole reason why they were given the VKM name, as at first in TNA, they were called the James Gang. On the November 2nd episode of Impact in 2006, the James Gang cut a worked shoot promo announcing they were quitting TNA and claiming that TNA had mismanaged them, and during the segment TNA's cut off their mics and things like that to make it seem more real. We knew it wasn't. So the James Gang had quit TNA, oh boy. But then on November 11th, a WWE house show in Connecticut was cancelled. Nothing out of the ordinary, but that's when TNA swooped in and decided to film a vignette with the James Gang outside WWE HQ in Connecticut discussing the cancellation and posted it to their website. Now, I have tried to find this video, I even found the link to it and put it in the Wayback Machine, but I just can't find it. I wish I could show you it, but I can't. You just have to imagine it, but this would be the start of something. On the November 16th episode of Impact, the James Gang returned after quitting, announced they were back, they had signed new contracts with creative control on them, and named themselves the Voodoo Kin Mafia, and they declared war on the WWE. Oh boy. The next few weeks would see more vignettes outside WWE headquarters, VKM calling out the recently revived DX and firing shots at them, and doing a whole angle where they were trying to get a cease and desist signed so that WWE could not use the DX name, even though they invented DX. The whole thing was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. The war, heavy quotation marks, would continue with TNA and the Voodoo Kin Mafia constantly mentioning and talking about the WWE, whether it be on TV or online. A big infamous moment with TNA mentioning WWE in this war was during the disastrous December to Dismember pay-per-view. The Hardy Boys made an open challenge to which TNA so quickly posted on their website saying VKM had accepted the challenge. But by the time they posted it, Eminem had already came out and accepted it live on the pay-per-view. TNA were literally watching their pay-per-views and then posting about them. Like, they were literally paying attention. They were looking for any opportunity to mention themselves and get themselves involved in this fake little war that was going on. I'm sorry, but it is just getting sad at this point. It's just getting really sad. It was also 2 days before this December Dismember pay-per-view that probably the maddest thing TNA did in regards to this war that they've done so far. They went to a WWE show, a house show to be exact. On December 1st, 2006, VKM, Vince Russo, Jeremy Borash, and a TNA camera crew all turned up at a house show in Knoxville. They filmed themselves interviewing the fans, buying the tickets, entering the arena, and watching the main event, which ironically enough featured DX. And even more ironically enough, they were in what looks like the cheapest seats possible. I have no idea why, but it just doesn't surprise me that TNA couldn't even get like front row or whatever. They had to sit at the very back. It doesn't surprise me. At Turning Point 2006, VKM came out parodying DX and then sent out a $1 million open challenge to Vince McMahon and DX. And yo, they're getting desperate at this point. They're getting desperate for any response from WWE at this point, who still weren't giving them one. Finally, the war would end. At Final Resolution in January 2007, VKM declared that they had won the war. They laid down the battle stations and declared victory over WWE's dead body. Wow. What a war. You guys sure owned them. You guys destroyed them. Wow. They cited WWE's refusal to acknowledge them and the fact that on a recent Raw episode, the fans chanted TNA and VKM. They decided that that was enough reason for them to declare victory. Wow, TNA, you sure showed WWE. And that's pretty much it for the fake war that TNA had with WWE. Ironically, only the first time they tried to go to war with them. Obviously, in 2010, they had their failed Monday Night War, which went horribly wrong. It wouldn't be until 2018 when WWE would finally actually acknowledge TNA, when Kurt Angle told Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn that TNA is hiring. And by that point, TNA was pretty much dead and no longer a rival to them. So a bit of a power play from the WWE, I can't lie. In the previous weeks of Impact, Magnus defeated Jeff Hardy in a Dixieland match to win the TNA World title. During his title coronation, AJ Styles returned with the TNA World title himself, the title that he never lost and was supposed to have vacated after Dixie Carter announced on Twitter in October 2013 that the title was vacated. Yes, that's how they vacated the World Championship. So tonight, it's AJ Styles versus Magnus to see who is the undisputed TNA World Champion. We open the show with Dixie Carter coming out, audible groan, she comes out and calls out AJ Styles to sign the contract for tonight's main event, and he comes out. Dixie demands AJ signs the contract, and AJ says that Dixie has a lot of confidence in her paper champion. AJ and Dixie argue until Magnus comes out. The crowd chant paper champ at him, and Magnus tells Dixie to leave the ring, leaving just him and Styles in the ring. Magnus cuts a very dull promo on AJ, calling himself the one true man, and then AJ basically calls him a Dixie Carter ass kisser. The contract is signed, and the main event is made official for tonight. We then go into our first match, as it's Eric Young and Joseph Park versus TNA World Tag Team Champions, the Bromans of Robbie E and Jesse Goddard. About 2 minutes into the match, we cut backstage, seeing ODB being beaten down by Gail Kim and Lady Tapper, and Eric Young runs backstage to check on his wife, basically making this a 2-on-1 handicap match. During the match, DJ Z at ringside is just playing air horns, and it's actually pretty funny, and Robbie E gets the pin on Joseph Park to win the match, and after the match, they take part of the guardrail and then hit the bro down to Joseph Park onto the guardrail. We cut backstage and Samoa Joe is talking to Dixie Carter. Samoa Joe said that he has AJ Styles back tonight and that he isn't going to let Dixie Carter screw over AJ Styles. Dixie then tells Samoa Joe that he should be focusing on his match tonight against EC3, so hopefully that should be a fun little match. We then cut into the ring and James Storm has asked his partner Gunner to come to the ring. Gunner collected a Feast of Fire briefcase over James Storm, and since then the two have had bad blood. The two exchange in a war of words, and Gunner basically says that he beat James Storm and he's better than James Storm. James Storm then challenges Gunner to a match for the briefcase, and Gunner accepts to end the segment. We go backstage and EC3 is beating down Samoa Joe, and the two start fighting onto the stage. Both men make it into the ring, and the match between EC3 and Samoa Joe has begun. Joe looks to hit the Muscle Buster, but Rockstar Spud comes out and stops Joe from doing it. Joe is then about to take out Spud, but then EC3 attacks Joe, and the bell is rung after about 5 minutes of in-ring action. And it's a no contest apparently, which makes 0 sense. They both continue to beat down Joe and take out his leg. The match, like I said, went for about 5 minutes, and for those 5 minutes, it wasn't too bad, and it could have been great, but of course, TNA had to ruin it. What an awful finish. We then cut backstage to Kurt Angle. Here we go, the boys are back in town. Being interviewed by Jeremy Borash, he talks about his Steel Cage Open challenge that he has issued for tonight, as he's preparing himself for his match with Bobby Roode at Genesis. Basically, tonight on Impact, Kurt Angle has made an open challenge for anyone to face him in a Steel Cage match. How exciting. Samoa Joe is then shown in the medical room, and the doctor is saying that Joe has to go to the hospital, and Samoa Joe is just furious because him going to the hospital means he can't be in AJ's corner for his match with Magnus in the main event tonight. Sting is then shown backstage encountering Gunner and James Storm, who have been knocked out. He then starts screaming at Dixie Carter, and he is furious that Joseph Park, ODB, Samoa Joe, Gunner and James Storm are all injured, and sees it all as a setup so that AJ has no one in his corner tonight. Actually, some really good acting here from Sting. You could tell he was really passionate, and it looked like he was properly passionate, and really good stuff from him here. And next up is the Kurt Angle Steel Cage Open Challenge, and who is answering the Open Challenge? It's Bobby Roode. Roode comes out and seemingly wants a piece of Kurt now and not have to wait until the pay-per-view to do so. But then Bobby gets on the mic and says, "Nah, I'm not facing you, but I found two people who hate you just as much as I do." And he introduces Kazarian and Christopher Daniels' Bad Influence, so it's going to be a 2-on-1 handicap match inside the cage. Bad Influence are in control right from the start, and every time Angle starts to make a comeback, Bad Influence get back in control fairly easily and quickly. Angle though managed to hit the Angle Slam on Kaz and get the win for a very impressive victory, and from a pretty decent match too. Probably the best match on the show so far, but that's not saying much since the other ones went about 7 minutes in total between them. We then go backstage and Dixie is asking if Bobby Roode is ready for his cage match tonight, and he's like, no, I wasn't actually facing Angle, but then Dixie says, oh yeah, I know, you're facing Sting tonight. So it's going to be Sting versus Roode in the cage, and Roode is absolutely furious. Then, this segment was really weird, we see Kurt Angle taking photos with fans, but then Al Snow pulls up in a car and says him and Angle need to leave to the airport now. Angle gets in and they drive off. Why are they leaving to the airport in a hurry? Who knows? Sting versus Bobby Roode is next, and this is during the phase where Sting wrestled in his shirt and he was seen backstage without the face makeup. This pretty much was not a good phase for Sting in TNA in terms of his in-ring work. Sting is in control most of the match, but of course Spud and EC3 run out, and Spud hands Roode a baton as EC3 distracts the ref. Roode uses the baton on Sting and beats him down with it. He then opens the door and escapes the cage to win the match and beat Sting. And I've never understood why TNA would do spots in cage matches like this, where they distract the referee so they could use a weapon or do a low blow. Like, it doesn't make sense. A cage match should be no DQ, so you don't need to do all these referee distractions. It's something that TNA always did that bugged me. We are then shown a video from earlier today showing Mr. Anderson walking into a funeral home. Mr. Anderson walks in there and it shows Bully Ray sitting in the back of the room. Bully Ray is threatening to set Mr. Anderson on fire if Anderson comes any closer. Bully Ray then tells Anderson to take out what's in the coffin. He takes the item out and they're towels, it seems like. He then looks back and Bully Ray has gone and vanished. What did I just watch? Sting confronts Dixie Carter backstage once more and says that nothing is going to stop him from being in AJ Styles' corner tonight. Dixie then starts trying to blackmail Sting and implies offering him a new higher contract if Sting isn't in AJ's corner, and asks him to make the right decision. And up next is AJ Styles versus Magnus, the anticipated main event that the whole show has been built around. There is a lot to unravel in this match, so bear with me here. The crowd are firmly on the side of AJ Styles because, of course they are, he's the best TNA wrestler of all time, and he's against Magnus, the biggest charisma vacuum in TNA history. The match starts off very slow with Magnus cowering away from Styles and faking an injury, and Magnus gets in the ring and immediately Spud and EC3 attack, which is legal by the way, as this match is no DQ. AJ takes them out and maybe now this match can finally properly begin, but no, EC3 attacks again and Magnus continues doing nothing. Sting then runs out to accompany AJ Styles and he beats down Spud and EC3, and Magnus and AJ finally start fighting themselves, but it doesn't last long because the Bromans come out and attack Sting and AJ. I get it's no DQ, I get that it's no DQ, but can we please have a bit of one-on-one action? The Bromans hit the bro down on Styles and Magnus makes the pin, but El Hebner is hesitant to count, and after he takes ages to count, Styles manages to kick out. The ring is cleared and now Magnus and Styles are finally fighting. Nope, because Bad Influence run out and they attack AJ. Bloody hell. Magnus pins AJ again, but this time Earl Hebner outright refuses to count and he leaves the ring, and Dixie sends out a replacement referee, his son Brian Hebner. The whole gang keep hitting moves on AJ, but AJ keeps on kicking out. AJ and Sting start making a comeback and they start beating down Bad Influence, the Bromans, EC3 and Spud, and we have a one-on-one situation with Magnus and AJ for about 5 seconds until Kaz attacks the ref when Magnus is locked in the calf crusher. AJ hits the Stars Clash on Magnus, but there is no referee, so Earl Hebner runs back out and is gonna count to 3, but on 2, Bad Influence take him out, which I gotta say, good near fall. Genuinely good near fall. AJ looks to hit a move from the top rope, but Roode now interferes. Roode hits some cool looking move on AJ about 3 times. I don't know if that was his finisher or not. and a new referee is brought out and counts to 3 for Magnus. This was easily the most overbooked match I have ever watched. Just a SHIT show. I get that Magnus is a heel, I get that you had this storyline where it was everyone versus AJ, but did you really need this much interference? Could you not have just let them fight one-on-one? Because Magnus now looks so damn weak. The show as a whole was not great either. I believe the longest match was like 8 minutes. And I did like how the show was built all around this match with the attacking and whatnot backstage, but the match itself didn't deliver. And it's like it's like you did all this hype for a Magnus match. Like, come on. But yeah, after this match was taped in December, contract negotiations between AJ Styles and TNA fell through, meaning this was AJ Styles' last ever match, which sucks. Oh, last ever TNA match, I should say. So first of all, who is Highlander Robbie? Let's answer that question first, right from the get-go, and talk about his career in WWE. Highlander Robbie, whose real name is Robbie McAllister, is a Scottish wrestler who debuted in 2001 alongside his brother Rory as a tag team called the Highlanders. In July of 2005, the pair signed a developmental deal with the WWE and started wrestling for Ohio Valley Wrestling. They wrestled in OVW for about a year, but didn't find any success in titles, and in June 2006, just a year after being signed, vignettes began airing on Raw, teasing the debut of the Highlanders. The Highlanders made their debut on Raw on the July 3rd edition with a win over the team of Matt Striker and Rob Conway, so a nice little debut for them, getting a win. And they would actually win against them again the next week on Raw, and would already find themselves in contention for the Spirit Squad's tag titles. Just 2 weeks into their main roster run, and they're in contention for tag titles already. I mean, maybe WWE believed in them and were high on them. Spoilers, no they weren't. But let's just continue. Robbie and Rory had a match with Kenny and Mikey from the Spirit Squad in a non-title match, but they did ultimately lose the match after interference from other Spirit Squad members, so they're still looking strong at least. On the September 4th edition of Raw, the Highlanders won a triple threat tag match over Charlie Haas and Viscera and Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch to officially become the #1 contenders for the tag titles. They faced the Spirit Squad at Unforgiven 2006 for the titles and were defeated after interference from other members who weren't in the match. And this would be their last ever title match. Yep, that was it. After that, they would actually wrestle on a couple pay-per-views after that. They wrestled on Cyber Sunday 2008, where they lost in a Texas Tornado tag match to Crime Time, also involving Charlie Haas and Viscera, and Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch. And then they wrestled on New Year's Revolution in 2007, losing a tag team turmoil match, where they were the first to be eliminated. Oh, how fast they fell. And yes, this would be their final ever pay-per-view match. Amazing stuff. Throughout 2007, they were pretty much just jobbers. They wrestled mainly on Heat, which was basically the main event of 2007. And whenever they did wrestle on Raw, they were losing and being squashed, whether it was against tag teams or in singles matches. On September 24th, 2007, the duo would appear on Raw and actually turn heel, so maybe something was coming for them. Maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel after all. Nope, literally nothing came from this turn, and the next time they had a #1 contenders match was in November, which they lost. Early on in 2008, Rory would actually get injured. A major injury, in fact. He would tear his pectoral muscle and would be out for up to 6 months, which is a big blow to the team, saying as the whole gimmick is that they're Highlanders. There's 2 of them. And since they weren't being pushed as a tag team, you can imagine that when one of them gets injured, the other one isn't going to get pushed as a single star. And it obviously meant that Robbie would have to wrestle a few singles matches, which, of course, he lost. He even wrestled John Cena and Randy Orton on the 17th of March in that match where Cena and Orton faced half of the Raw roster. But just 10 days later after this, Robbie would get himself caught in a little incident. Well, not a little incident, a pretty big one. Both Robbie and Rory of the Highlanders were very unhappy in WWE. They were not happy with the way they were being treated, the way they were being booked, and Robbie especially just stopped caring entirely and took matters into his own hands. Robbie took it upon himself to attend a live TNA Impact episode on the 27th of March 2008. And what ended up happening is that he was shown in the crowd on camera and on live TV with a nameplate displaying his real name and labeling him as a WWE superstar. And reports around this time say that he was in very hot water after this. Reportedly, a WWE official called Robbie on his phone and told him to leave the event immediately. And a big problem was that this event was just days before WrestleMania 24, so because of this, Robbie lost his WrestleMania paycheck, which I gotta say, that's really harsh, like come on. After this, Robbie was never used on TV again until his brother Rory returned from injury. They had one match losing to Crime Time, and then they were released from the WWE, and yeah, they were just fired. And pretty much, they were released because of the incident with Robbie, and many people attribute him appearing in Impact and the heat that he got backstage, leading him to getting fired along with his brother. In an interview with Club WWI in December 2009, Robbie explained his thought process behind attending the TNA show. Well, I don't really know exactly why I did it. I happened to go to see my buddy Johnny Devine. He's a good friend of mine up here in Canada. It was my stupidity to actually go in there and watch it. In hindsight, I look at it all as a setup, but I'm the only one who knows why I went. Do you know what I mean? Everyone else can speculate, even Rory can speculate. It was my own stupidity, I don't even understand why I did it. But it could have been a subconscious thing that I did because WWE weren't using us, stuff like that. But it was just a dumb thing on my part. I wish I could take it back, but you never can. So now I just have to look and go, oh well. In regards to the reaction from the TNA locker room, Robbie said this. Actually, most of the ones who are backstage at TNA, I talked to them after the incident and they said that was a really dumb move for TNA. And my simple thing in my head is when you look at me on their television, it didn't help their television program at all. It didn't elevate them, so why even bother doing it? Robbie would then go on to explain how the WWE locker room reacted, in particular The Undertaker, and why Robbie had to own up to his mistake. He said this, actually, he was all over me. At the end, there was Fit Finlay. He was all over me. Actually, it came to the point where they kept asking me, I'm like, listen guys, I can't tell you why I screwed up. It's a screw up on my part. Why do you think I'm standing in front of you? I need to hear this because I just did the stupidest thing in my life, and I'm going to hear the repercussions, so I might as well hear them now. And Undertaker just stopped. He just stopped hassling me about it. There was no explanation I could give because it was just dumb. Robbie's brother and the other half of the Highlanders, Rory, did an interview in 2012, and he said that Robbie knew what he was doing and that he knew Robbie was attending the show. He said this, yes, I knew he was going, and I knew what he was going to do. He knew TNA was going to put him on screen. He knew he was going to be set up by Jarrett, and to be honest, I don't think he cared because at that time, we were so down on everything WWE. Robbie's not a stupid guy. I know everyone said that was a dumb move. It wasn't. He knew exactly what he was doing. One thing a wrestler knows is where the hard camera is. For him to be caught on hard cam, that wasn't a stupid mistake. We both knew why he was going and knew our WWE careers were going to be coming to an end that night. So yeah, that's the story of how TNA got a WWE wrestler fired. Whether or not it was a setup is unknown. Whether or not TNA did it on purpose to get one of their competitors' wrestlers in hot water also remains a mystery, so I guess we'll never really know. Since being released from the WWE, the Highlanders really haven't done anything all that notable in their careers, haven't signed for any major promotions, and really, I haven't really heard of much of them since they got released. What is going on guys, it's Tom of Thompson Wrestling here and welcome to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be looking at 8 people who were fired by TNA. This video does not include people who requested their release. Basically, we're going to be looking at some of the most notable firings and releases in TNA's history, discussing the backstory and stories behind why they were fired, and look at some of the craziest and most interesting firing stories in TNA's short but sweet history. So let's get right into the video. Coming in at number 8, we have MVP. MVP debuted in TNA at the January 30th, 2014 tapings of Impact, revealing himself to be the kayfabe investor in the company who had signed the Wolves and was countering Dixie Carter's plans the previous weeks. He captained his team of wrestlers to defeat Dixie's team of wrestlers at Lockdown 2014, where his team won the match and MVP was given kayfabe control of the company. Eventually, MVP would turn heel and just become a regular wrestler on TNA, challenging for the world title a few times, and being unsuccessful sadly. MVP would also form his own stable called the Beatdown Clan, with members such as Kenny King, Lashley, Samoa Joe and Homicide all at one point being a part of it. But behind the scenes, MVP, our good friend Montel Vontainius Porter, was very adamant for former TNA wrestler Hernandez to be a part of the stable. Hernandez would sign back with TNA and join the Beatdown Clan, with all the material for it being taped on Impact. However, this would lead to legal troubles for TNA. You see, at the time, Hernandez was signed with Lucha Underground, but reportedly he told TNA, get this, he told TNA that he was a free agent. So by him Hernandez appearing on Impact, he was breaching his Lucha Underground contract. So because of this, TNA blamed MVP for it, and they were forced to edit out all the Beatdown Clan segments that they had taped, and they just disbanded the stable entirely due to the bad press they were receiving and due to this incident. Just days after all of this happened, MVP would depart from the company, and most believe that it is to do with this incident. Number 7, we have Matt Hardy. Matt Hardy was released from the WWE on October 15th, 2010. He was floating around the roster and was released after posting YouTube videos stating his disinterest in working for the company anymore. A year prior to Matt's release, Jeff departed from WWE and joined TNA and became one of their biggest stars. So Matt Hardy followed suit and debuted in TNA on January 9th, 2010 at Genesis as a surprise opponent for Rob Van Dam, where he would defeat RVD to prevent him from getting a shot at the world title, which was being held by Jeff Hardy at the time. And from there, Matt Hardy would have some very high profile matches and some high profile feuds. He continued his feud with Rob Van Dam, wrestled Sting for the world title in a losing effort, and he had a feud with Bobby Roode and James Storm, aka Beer Money, where him and a mystery partner were granted a shot at Beer Money's TNA World Tag titles. Beer Money in the storyline wants to face the Hardy Boys. However, Matt Hardy would introduce his mystery partner as the returning Chris Harris, who was James Storm's former partner, to, let me tell you, one of the quietest return pops ever. I'm not even lying. Go look it up. This segment is on YouTube. It's so quiet and so awkward. Matt Hardy was suspended from the company on June 21st, supposedly because he was late to events all the time, and he was ultimately released from the company on August 20th, the same day he was arrested for DUI, ending a 7-month and fairly underwhelming run. Number 6, Mr. Anderson. Old joke, I know, but Mr. Kennedy is someone who many people believe to be quite underutilized in WWE, and when he won the Money in the Bank, many people thought he was on course to be a future star, but obviously he would lose the Money in the Bank due to injury to Edge, never really do anything afterwards, and get fired after nearly injuring Randy Orton. From there, Kennedy would go to TNA and rename to Mr. Anderson. He would find success in TNA and would win the world title there, unlike in WWE. He won it twice there, in fact. However, Mr. Anderson never really connected with the fans, and as much people thought that he deserved a main event push in WWE, while he was in TNA, he was never really able to step up and put in a main event performance equivalent to what the other main eventers at the time were putting up. Anderson was fired from TNA in March 2016 after it was revealed he had failed an on-the-spot drug test. Number 5, Alex Silver. Alex Silva was the greatest wrestler to ever enter that 6-sided ring. He achieved and did so much in TNA that I can't even list all of his accolades. Sarcasm. Alex Silva was a guy that was pretty much signed to TNA by accident when TNA didn't want him, all because of Ric Goddamn Flair. I released an entire video of how he was signed, so you can check that out on my channel, link in the description for more detail on that whole story. So Alex Silva came into TNA, and since TNA didn't want him, he literally did nothing. He wrestled in OVW, their developmental territory, for about a year, had 3 matches on the main TNA roster, losing all of them, and was removed from the roster page just only a year after he was signed. So pretty much, TNA signed him, kept him around for a year before firing him, rather than just firing him immediately to not be rude. Number 4, we have Bubba the Love Sponge. Oh god, I have to say this name again. Bubba the Love Sponge was only in TNA for 3 months before getting fired, but by god what an eventful 3 months it was, and by god was it 3 months too long. But yeah, like I said, he had a very eventful 3 months. He had his nose legitimately broken by Mick Foley in a backstage angle, he got beaten up by Awesome Kong, and spent 3 months in a company that realistically he shouldn't have been hired for in the first place. Bubba the Love Sponge's beef with Awesome Kong stemmed from comments he made about the Haiti earthquake, and after he was beaten up by Kong, and he was taken off TV due to the PR and bad press that TNA were receiving due to his comments, Kong would leave the company after requesting her release, and he would return to TV on March, only to be fired 1 month later after he and Kong had a verbal confrontation on the Cowhead show, and Bubba said some very not safe for work and unmonetizable things that I can't repeat for the sake of ads on this video. For more detail about Kong and Bubba's beef, I made a video on that too, so check that out, link in the description. And speaking of Awesome Kong, number 3 is Awesome Kong. Like I just said previously, Awesome Kong left TNA in 2010 after requesting her release following her backstage altercation with Bubba the Love Sponge, but she would return to the company on January 7th, 2015. She debuted as a monster heel and would feud with the likes of Jessica Havoc, and she would feud with Taryn Terrell for the TNA Knockouts Championship. Kong turned face on the May 1st, 2015 episode of Impact when she aligned herself with Gail Kim to feud with the Dollhouse stable, and she even competed in the World Title Series and could have won the TNA World Title. The next year, however, on January 5th, 2016, we saw Kong turn heel once again and become the new leader of the Dollhouse. Kong had a new angle to be a part of and was set to feud with Gail Kim. However, just a month later, on February 5th, Kong was released from her contract, kinda out of nowhere. But the reason being, and the reason that is widely reported, is that she had a backstage altercation with Rebby Hardy, Matt Hardy's wife. Kong has never wrestled for TNA or Impact since, and would take a 3-year hiatus from wrestling following her release, but she would make her return to wrestling when she debuted for AEW at their Double or Nothing pay-per-view this year. Number 2 is Alberto Del Rio. Alberto Del Rio was signed to TNA during that horrible GFW merger, and their aim was to push him as the face of the company and have him carry the world title, and it did not go to plan. He was given the world title, but was stripped of the title shortly after and suspended soon after because of a real-life domestic incident involving his then-girlfriend at the time, Paige. From there, he luckily never won the title again and wasn't pushed as their top star, thank God, but ultimately Del Rio would continue to be unreliable for the company, and he was fired from TNA in 2018 after failing to show up to the Lucha Underground vs Impact show. Crazy how far Impact and Lucha Underground's relationship had come, you know? From TNA accidentally using a guy who was in contract with Lucha Underground, to them doing shows together. Now that's character development. That's more character development than any of the cruiserweights in WWE have received. And number 1 is Jeff Jarrett. So the reason I'm putting Jeff Jarrett at number 1 is that his firing is major in the sense because he's literally the founder of the company. Jarrett originally parted ways with the company in 2014 to form GFW, but would return in 2017 for that amazing merger. But the merger was very short-lived, and Jarrett would take an indefinite leave of absence on September 5th due to personal problems in real life after he entered a rehabilitation facility. And on October 23rd, the merger with GFW was terminated, along with Jarrett's contract. Again, if you want to hear more detail on the GFW merger, I've done a video on that too, so that will be linked in the description, along with the Alex Silver video and the Bubba/Kong video.